Good evening, everybody. It's Tuesday night, ready for show and share. I know we have some new people here, new faces here tonight. Could you raise your hand so I get an idea of how many are still around? Awesome, awesome. After the program, if you haven't already, please see anybody with the red badge, and we can give you a tour or answer any questions you may have. But tonight is a special night. But before we get to it, we're going to have some shares. And the first one is Neil. Sorry about that. With the, oh boy, Tensegrity Tuesday. Sounds exciting.
Well, see, time will tell. I guess I can put this here, okay. Good evening, everybody. About 2 years ago, I was clicking through a bunch of YouTube videos and happened upon one about tensegrity. And if you're not familiar with what tensegrity is, I'm not even going to attempt to explain it to you right now. It's interesting, to say the least. For those who want to look it up, it's spelled Tensegrity. And to help you remember that, it's a combination of the two words tension and integrity. So anyway, for 2 years, I'd been dabbling back and forth and wondering what it would be like to make a tensegrity piece. And I was looking at a lot of examples, and most of them were made either square, rectangular, or triangular. And I didn't see any that looked like they had been turned on a lathe. Well, I'm the lathe guy, as I've been called now, and I took that as a challenge. So the first piece I did, actually I wasn't sure. Maybe they weren't round because tensegrity didn't work on a round object. So I set out to prove whether or not they could. And I don't know how well this is going to show up, but all of the pieces I'll show you now, I can't really hand them out to be passed around. Kind of difficult to do that here tonight. But after show and share, I'll go over into the woodworking zone and over by the big lathe, and you can take a closer look at it. Let me see what this looks like if I put it here. Let me see, zoom out or zoom in? Zoom out. So essentially what a tensegrity is when you take two or more pieces of wood and make one of them look like it's floating. And as you can see here, the two major pieces of wood, this one and this one, are not connected, but they are being held in suspension by flexible wires. So when you see this thing standing up, you kind of look at it and think, how is that thing not falling in on itself? And that's all part of the tensegrity, which works on compression and tension. And beyond trying to explain it beyond that is not my ability right now. But this piece I call Hooked on Tensegrity, for obvious reasons.
I was going to ask about the fish hook, right?
Yeah, and I realized that would be the only title for it, considering how obsessed I've been lately with tensegrity, which, by the way, I called tonight Tensegrity Tuesday. I'm working on at least 4, maybe 6 other pieces of various degrees that, when they're ready, I'll bring them in for show and share so you can see just how obsessed and crazy I am. So this is one piece. And this is probably going to be a little bit more difficult to see here in the horizontal. So as I said, probably get a better view and a better idea. Well, let me hold it up and you get somewhat of an idea. So I was telling Tracy earlier, because of the tension on the wire and that it does move somewhat, this would make an ideal seismograph, because it does jiggle. So that's the two pieces of tensegrity for tonight. I have one other thing to talk about, but does anybody have any questions about the tensegrity? How about I hold it like that, or you want to try and see it on the camera? For those of you who may have been here, I think about a month ago, or maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago, Joe had brought in a tensegrity table that he had made out of steel and chain. It was beautiful.
Is that what got you started?
No, like I said, I've been looking at it for like 2 years at different pieces and saying someday I got to try something like that. Okay. Okay, the other thing to announce is I am going to put in for the next round of classes, wood turning classes for January. The dates I'm going to propose are Wednesday, January 10th and Thursday, January 17th, and I'm sorry, Wednesday, January 17th will be the 2 days. The wood turning 102 and wood turning 202 are usually given a week apart. And another thing that I'm working on now is a more or less open wood turners hack night where we can get together, anybody who's interested, whether you're a wood turner or not, and discuss and show and share anything that we've made that made life a little bit easier when turning on the lathe. And to give an example, I brought one thing tonight that you can also take a closer look at over there by the big lathe and woodworking zone. And that is, any of you who have done wood turning, any of you who are familiar with how expensive some wood turning tools can be, I brought this one tonight to give you an idea that you don't necessarily have to spend your monthly allowance to make a good, decent wood turning tool. And especially with the popularity now of carbide tools, that here's a gouge that I made, not really a gouge, it's a carbide tool that, unlike most of the commercial carbide tools that go anywhere from about $70 to $130 for one tool that does this, I made this tool for under $5. So if you want to take a look at this and see what it is, again, get a better idea, and if you have any questions as to how I made it, I'll be glad to answer your questions.
Can you put the end under the?
Let me get this out of the way. Pretty much what it is a round bar that has been drilled, 1/4 of an inch hole in here. And instead of using the typical carbide cutters that you would get for a carbide tool, commercial carbide tool, I've used a 1/4 inch carbide router bit that's held in there with the set screw.
Can you change that tip out?
I'm sorry, what was it?
Can you change the tip out?
Yeah. Oh, it's a set screw. You can take it out and put in different router tips. And as you know, the router tips carbide tools, they last almost forever. And when they do start going dull, and this particular one, it's a cove bit, it has 2 edges. So, and then of course, if you take my class, you learn how to turn handles.
Is the 102 the beginner class?
Yes, 102 is the beginner's class, and it is a prerequisite to the 202, where you get into more depth as to how to work with the wood, cutting wood, preparing wood for turning, and how it's mounted on the lathe, all the different types of chucks. That's it. Good.
When you first showed your gouging tool, I thought maybe it was a screwdriver tip you had on there, but no, it's even better. I like that. Next up, we have Isaac with the Blinken project.
Hello, friends. I have brought to show you this evening a little Arduino project that I've been working on. This is a sound-activated LED lighting controller, and hopefully we'll get this thing working here to amuse you. I have built this thing in what I think of as sort of a contemporary hacker style, by which I awkwardly mean that it's built up chiefly out of these large off-the-shelf modules, so you don't have to start from scratch building the whole thing. You can see there's a module here, which is the Arduino brain, and then there's a module here, which is the audio sensor, and then a module over here, which is the power supply. And so my role is just to make sort of the support structure around it. There's a little circuitry up here that controls these lights, And then there's a little knob that lets you adjust the sensitivity. But for the most part, the hardware is very straightforward. So you buy those little bits, and then your job is just to plumb them together to do the wiring that makes everything talk back and forth. And the complexity is really in the instruction code that you put in the Arduino. And so what this thing is doing, you can see this light right here is lighting up whenever it judges that my voice is sufficiently loud to count as a sound trigger. And the sound trigger makes the lights come on for like 30 seconds. And if it gets re-triggered within the 30 seconds, it just extends that time period. So it's not visualizing the sound at all. The animation is from a different algorithm. So this project took me about 2 horror movies to solder together. And once I got it physically constructed, I could move over to the sofa and start working on the instruction code for the Arduino. The instruction code took like maybe 1 horror movie before it was ready to test. And when I got it installed, it didn't work at all, which was not at all surprising. I mean, I'm prepared for that. They usually don't work to begin with. But the fun is now figuring out where I've made my mistakes, right? So I start debugging my software code. And I spent a shameful period of time trying to figure out why I couldn't get this basic thing to work. I mean, my head is shaped very much like the surface of my desk at this point. For the first long period of time, I was going through the software code, and I just couldn't find anything wrong with it. And finally, I got so desperate, I started looking at the hardware. I mean, I thought that was easy, but no, I've made a mistake. But the hardware seems fine, and still it doesn't work. So the punchline was simply this. This little microphone module didn't work to begin with. And in retrospect, duh. I mean, these things are made for like, $2. I mean, you can't even get the parts for $2. How do they do that? Who knows? But the idea that some of them come off the assembly line not working is hardly a surprise. But the mistake I make is in reflexively blaming myself. The odds are I'm right about that, but at some point, turn elsewhere. So hopefully you will not make as gargantuan a wasting of time mistake as I did. We won't talk specifics there, but it was several horror movies. This project is actually not for me, it's for Sue. This is a collaboration that we've been working on. In fact, if I take the power off, I'll show you that this end of it, where all the LEDs live, this part just pulls right off because driving these LEDs is not its job. What is it for? Well, perhaps Sue will share that with you later. For now, just know that you have the opportunity to be less foolish than me. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. It's good to see that it's working. Yes. And yes, I will be sharing what that's going into later. It's not quite ready. I wanted to do some tests of my own. I have been prototyping and, much like Isaac, prototyping some more and prototyping some more. But more about that when I show you the full project. It's definitely been a process. Do we have any more shares? I'm amazed. Everybody must be just ready for show and share. Or no, excuse me, Toy Tech. So without any further ado, audience, I don't know if you're hanging around, but if you could see this room, you would be amazed. We have a lot of people here. Instead of the normal audience setup, we have tables and workstations. We have, I think, 40 plus toys to adapt. 86 toys. Wow. I wish I could. All right, we'll grab one of the toys. And we have here a little reindeer. So right now, you need fingers, really. Uh-oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. I don't know how long he's gonna go. Anyway. So some kids cannot use their fingers. They need to use chins, elbows, knees, armpits, whatever. But we want them to have a good Christmas, so we modify these to make them friendly. And for that, Isaac's going to come up and say a few words. Oh, first I want to introduce Stanley from Spark. I'm sorry, I'm new to this, even though this is the 7th year, 7-ish year that we've done this program in conjunction with Spark to adapt toys for their clients. So Stanley, would you come up and say a few words? Yeah. Stuff it somewhere.
They're the wire cutters.
Is he done?
I'm done, you speak.
No, I was asking, what's the toy done?
Oh.
We are about to do something that we look forward to every year. In that we spend most of our time upstairs working with older kids through the elderly. But Christmas, we set aside some time to work with younger kids. And we're hoping next Tuesday, through your efforts and our ability to continue to make connections with them, to bless 100+ kids with a toy because of the work that you're going to do tonight. A toy that they can use, a toy they can have fun with, a toy that their family will get to enjoy them having fun with. So thank you for joining us to make that possible.
All right. I know I speak for myself and probably a lot of our members. This is the one thing we do a year that we really feel good about.
Excellent.
We really makes us feel good. Isaac?
All right, well, thank you, Stanley. This is definitely something that I look forward to throughout the year. It's always a good time. It's always complete and total mayhem. This is, I think, an especially special year for Knox Makers. We have, for 7 or so years, been the elves making these toys do that thing that Stanley described so very eloquently. Wake up. And that, I think, has tremendous value and merit. But this year, as of course many of you know, it was an especially difficult time because, for various reasons, the toys did not arrive as hoped and expected. And so we put the word out to the Knox Makers community, and a number of folks donated money and helped to supply the funds to get the toys that are going to get adapted. And other folks went out and shopped and bought toys on their own and brought them in. And that's why we have this overabundance of toys this year that's going to keep us well busy tonight. So thank you all for being so amazing and for supporting this program in so many ways. It's very meaningful to me, and I know it is to Spark. What I'm going to do, if I can find the right button, where'd it go? I want to show you in brief what this is all about because I know some of you have not toy teched before. Toy tech is all about this. It's all about enabling these kids to use these toys without requiring that manual dexterity that may elude them. And the manual dexterity is required in a variety of ways from this variety of toys. So each toy you pick up may be a fresh new adventure. So like this one you see, you're supposed to squeeze its little paw to make it go. Whereas this one, you're supposed to rub the angel's belly. Why is that a thing? To make it go. Or this one, you're supposed to pat it on the back, right? So each one has like a sensor or a switch that you're supposed to interact with. And so the first part of it then is figuring out what is the default interaction and how can we make it work. And so at the end of the night, they'll have a big friendly switch externally that can be placed wherever it works for the child to use it. And the switch, as many of you know, these accessibility switches use the 1/8" what used to be the headphone jack. That's what they connect up with. And so it's these headphone jacks that we're going to be wiring into the toys tonight. So every table has got a sack of these headphone jacks on it. These are the things that we're going to adapt into the toys to allow the switches to get connected. And there's also an example of one of the adapted switches on each table that will allow you to test the toys as you move forward and make certain they work properly, and also to irritate the people sitting next to you. For those of you who do not ordinarily do this sort of thing for fun, in brief, this is an example of an electrical circuit, which you may remember from other times in your life. You see here we have like a battery and some wires that go down here on the side to this lamp and then to this switch, or it could perhaps be a lamp, could be a telegraph switch, something like that, and then up to the battery again. The key thing here is you see the switch is interrupting the circuit, right? It's like a drawbridge that's been lifted. And so until you press that little switch down, the lamp won't light up, right? And that's fundamentally what's going on inside these toys. When you have a squeezy paw, that's where the little switch is. And it's not yet allowing the electrons to move through that circuit. So what we're going to do tonight is to add a second switch. We electrical nerds call this in parallel. It's like having two different bridges across the gap of the water, right? So if either of these switches gets pressed, then the little lamp will come on. For us, the second switch is this, right? So you can still use the paw, you can also use the outside adaptable switch. So to make this happen, we'll start out with these toys, which are of course extremely well packaged. So opening the thing up and getting the toy free is your first hurdle. And I would encourage you to do that with as much delicacy as you can muster, because we would like to restore these toys to a state that looks like they just came from the store at the end of the night. So as much as you may really, really want to rip that stupid thing apart, please don't do that, right? So carefully open the thing up, and then we'll have a good look at it, right? Figure out how is it this thing is supposed to go. So you may have this singing, dancing Cy, for example, who apparently you're supposed to squeeze his paw. So how do you make him work? So if you think about it, you're gonna be able to feel when you squeeze the stuffed animal business that they've got like an electrical box inside their tummy area, like a plastic thing where the batteries and the massive speaker that annoys your neighbors and all that sort of thing lives, and then like a wire that goes out to wherever that switch is, right? And so we know that we need to interrupt the wire that goes to the switch, wherever that is in your toy. And so with this one, that means it's going down his arm. We know it's got to go through his neck area. So maybe we're going to go in through the back of his neck to get to those wires, right? You can kind of feel them when you squeeze the fluffy toy. You can feel where the wires are inside. And then we operate. So you need to get some sort of an appropriate tool, like a razor knife or a hacksaw or whatever you got convenient, and obtain access to the innards of the toy and identify those wires that we're talking about that lead to that switch. If you gently tug on them, usually you can see their little paw wiggle, and you know that's the wires that goes to the paw, right? There may be more wires. They may have eyeballs that light up in a creepy way or something like that. You want to make sure you're going for the right wires. This is an example of what's inside, right? There's the plastic goofball box that I'm describing with the wires that go out to the pushy switch. And so it's there in the middle of those wires that we want to interact and add our new business. Here's a similar one. This one also has some sort of a glowy business in the top left, right? We're not interested in that. Finding the switch, interrupting the wires that go to the switch. So to do that, there's a few electrical nerd things that you will need to know. First of them is stripping wires. Stripping wires can be accomplished a couple of different ways. Your wires have an insulation on the outside that keeps them from short circuiting, the rubbery, jackety business that may have a color. So you could take that off with a knife, which is being demonstrated in these strange photos, or you can use wire strippers. There's some of those on each of your tables. You can use wire strippers to expose some of the conductor inside. One way or the other, you have to get access to the delicious metal interior, which is the part where the electrons live. In this image, you can sort of see that somebody has gotten a little bit overly vigorous with their cutting implement and have nicked these wires. Nicked wires are weakened, and so it'll be easier for those things to break apart and for the thing to quit working at some point. So we're trying to use a little bit of subtlety when you strip your wires. Try not to get in there and goof up that conductor if you can possibly help it. Next up is wire splicing. That's what we've got to do with these tails, right? We're going to splice these wires in line with the paw switch or the head switch or whatever. And I will show you 3 wire splicing techniques that will serve you well throughout the remainder of your life. First among them is the pigtail splice. A pigtail splice, you take the 2 conductors and you wrap them around each other. If you want, you can then straighten the business out, which is happening down here. Or if you don't straighten it out, then you see you've reversed the direction of the wire. And depending on the situation, you may prefer one or the other. You can also incorporate more than 2 wires in a pigtail splice. You just get them all in there when you're doing your twisty business, right? Now this is not a great splice, but it's the beginning of one. It's not great until we solder, but we'll talk about that in a minute. The second essential splice for your life, the wrap splice. Wrap splice is very similar. You take your 2 conductors and you wrap them around each other so that it's in line. So now we do not reverse the direction. A wrap splice makes a nice, slim, inline connection. It's very durable and strong. Finally, I'll point out to you the T-splice. The T-splice is how you can add a third wire in to an existing wire. If you have the subtlety about you, you can cut some of the insulator off of a wire, exposing a bare section, and then bring your new wire in and wrap it around. That's a T-splice. Okay? Soldering wise, each of your tables has a soldering iron on it, and many of you have toy teched before, and I will encourage the toy tech veterans to provide assistance and emotional support to people who are toy teching for the first time. Soldering iron is something like this. This one is terrible, yours is less terrible, but basically it's a stick that gets hot on the end. It gets very hot and it will burn the tar out of you, so please be careful once you get the thing plugged in and turned on. Remember that anything it touches is becoming hot. On the one hand, that is the point. On the other hand, that includes like the base that it's sitting on. And so when you're holding, what's that?
And melting the toys, we had some surgery last year.
And melting the toys, that's exactly right. If you're unwary, then the unattended iron will just kind of wander over into a fluffy toy and then bad times. It's very awkward. So please be mindful of all the things that you're heating up intentionally or otherwise. And remember that the cables are very easy to get entangled up with, particularly when we're clustered around these tables. You know, you get that wrapped around your friend and the next thing you know, it's flying across the room. So please be mindful and careful of the cables. Also be mindful of the fact that solder is poisonous. Only a little, and we're not going to use that much of it tonight. I'm just saying you're going to wash your paws when this is all over with and don't eat any sandwiches, okay? You want to use some sort of a standy up base for your iron. Should be in a standy up base right now. That hopefully makes it less likely to rotate around and attack people. The soldering technique is extremely simple for making splices. We've already seen mechanically how that works. To actually do the splice, once it's set up, once you've got the thing twisted up, you want to make sure that it's not like a just barely held in together thing. You know what I'm saying? It should be stable once you're done wrapping those things around. Then you bring in your soldering iron. Here it's coming in from underneath. Use a technique that pleases you, but basically you want to make good contact with the tip of the iron and the metal of the wire, and let it be touching together for about 2 seconds, maybe 3 seconds. We're heating up the wires to the temperature of the solder melts at, which is around 700 degrees Fahrenheit. Then we will bring in the solder, and that's what you see coming in from the top there, which will then melt, and it will then wick through the wires with capillary action, right? And that's going to make a mechanically strong metallurgical electrical connection that is amazing, and it's how you should always connect wires together. As you solder throughout the evening, as your iron sits there plugged in, it will begin to oxidize because it is very hot and angry. And when the iron oxidizes, it looks dirty and dull and not shiny. A not shiny iron is a sad iron. So what you want to do is periodically take the dirty end of your iron and get it in that sponge or steel wool. Each table has at least one or the other. So you're just going to rub its little nose in there and make it all shiny again, and then it will solder much, much better for you. Finally, and very importantly, remember that you have to replace the insulation that you have removed, right? Because these electrical conductors will naturally short circuit given a tiny opportunity, and you don't want that. So for that, we just take our connection and basically mummify it with a bit of a good old electrical tape. There is also heat shrink tubing on a couple of the tables, one up front and one in the back, as well as a hot air wand that you can use for shrinking the heat shrink. That is perhaps a superior insulation technique, but they both will suffice. Please be sure also that you're thinking about strain relief, because remember, these are toys that we're going to give to children, and when you have a wire coming out of a thing and a child can reach it, they will pull on it mightily. And we want to make sure that this thing does not then pull the guts and brains out in some grotesque fashion, right? So think about how you can manage that if the wire is pulled. And it's kind of going to depend on what the insides of your toy looks like. At a minimum, you want to make sure that you're wrapping the connection that you've made so that it has some mechanical relief if somebody's tugging on it. If you have to go in through hard plastic, some of these things will have a hard plastic surface you'll need the wire to go through. We have a drill you can use to make a hole, pass the wire through, and then maybe you knot it so that it can't pull back through, or maybe use a cable tie, something like that. Just think about how you can secure things. So here, like maybe you secure the wire to the insides with a cable tie, something like that. And then test, be sure you test before we do anything further, right? So plug in your little switch thing and make sure that your toy will make an obnoxious noise reliably whenever you click the thing, right? Because you don't want to proceed until that bit works. When it does, all you got to do is close up the patient. We've got some folks here from the fiber arts area who are infinitely more qualified to speak about that part than me. It's bad times when I try. But you want to close that thing up and then return it to its packaging and try and make it look as fancy and new as you can so the kid gets the unboxing experience. You know, it doesn't seem like they got some whack old used toy, right? Everybody good? Ready for madness? We have
Do you have one more announcement?
one more announcement. What more announcement could you possibly have? Oh, I brought holiday movies. Is that the announcement?
Oh, no.
Oh. Okay, what is it?
Yes, so I don't want to take away from that,
Oh, no.
but we are an all-volunteer, excuse me, organization, and normally we ask for volunteers to, you know, maybe take out the trash or do things. Well, tonight, after we're all done with Toy Tech, we'd like our volunteers to help us put the classroom back the way it was, you know, take down the tables, put the chairs back in audience order. So that's pretty much all I have. If one of you don't really care to do soldering or sewing, we'd ask that you maybe change the filters over in the wood shop area. And back to Isaac.
Filters, boo. Let's play with toys. Your options are Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman, or Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. Okay, that's Lori for Martians. Also, we have attempted as best we can to put all the toys that look relatively easy to adapt on this side. So if you're a beginner or if you feel maybe a little bit less certain, maybe draw from this side. This side are the toys that are going to put up a fight. So if you're feeling ready to go, let's go after these ones. I think we've got like 86 toys or something, so we've got plenty to go. Let's do it.
And we also have glue guns and other things on this front table. Sure.
Can we,